final session of this, from what I've seen, really fantastic first day of the conference. I want to remind everybody to please turn off your cell phones, and so that we can all listen with extreme attention to our two speakers. We're going to have two readings, first by Orlando Menes and then by Michal Guvrin. And then we're going to have a question and answer period at the end after both readings. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Orlando first. Orlando Ricardo Menes was born in Lima, Peru, to Cuban parents, but has lived most of his life in the US. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating this for people who were here earlier, since Evan already introduced Orlando, but I figured there's a second sight kind of element to doing this again. So for the benefit of those of you who were not here, Orlando Menes was born in Lima, Peru, to Cuban parents, but has lived most of his life in the US. Since 2000, he has taught in the creative writing program at the University of Notre Dame. His third poetry collection, Fetish, won the 2012 Prairie Schooner Book Prize in Poetry and was published by the University of Nebraska Press in 2013. He's also the author of Furia, published by Milkweed in 2005, and Rumba Atop the Stones by People Tree at 2001. In addition, Menes is editor of Renaming Ecstasy, Latino Writings on the Sacred, Bilingual Press, 2004, and The Open Light, Poets from Notre Dame, 1991 to 2008, published by University of Notre Dame Press in 2011. Besides his own poems, Menes has published translations of poetry in Spanish, including My Heart Flooded with Water, selected poems by Alfonsina Storni, published by Latin American Literary Review Press in 2009. That same year, he also received a literature fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. Orlando, please.
Thanks so much for the introduction. If you would be so kind to clap, which is great, after I'm done with all the poems, rather than after each one. And I wish to thank certainly Marcella for inviting me, and for Nadia for arranging everything, and also for my fellow writers, Gabby, Shusi, and Evan. It's been a wonderful experience, and also Michal. Also, it's been a wonderful experience to have made fellowship with all of you. I will be reading from two books, Furia and Fetish. The first poem I will read is about my hair. It's complicated. Gabby spoke about mothers who influence our writing because they're not entirely well. My mother, may she rest in peace, I loved her dearly, but she was not well. And she was haunted by many ghosts. Ghosts that really made no sense whatsoever, but she was. And in Cuba, I have to explain a few things about Cuba so that you understand the poem. Cuba is a nation that has a multiracial population, people of Spanish descent, the white people of mixed descent, the mulattoes, and then people of black descent, who are black, African descent, los negros. And why does the country have this multiracial population? Well, it all goes back to slavery. When Cuba was discovered by Columbus, it was soon settled, as well as the island of Hispaniola. And in the process of that conquest, unfortunately, the native populations were wiped out. They were extinguished. There was genocide. Very few survived. So the society that the Spaniards formed in the 16th century was one that consisted of the Spaniards, their children, the Creoles, and the slaves from Africa. And these these populations would vary in size over the years, of course, due to historical circumstances, but it wasn't until the Haitian Revolution that Cuba became a prime sugar producer. And so what did the Cubans, in essence, the Spaniards and their children who lived in Cuba, well, they just expanded the importation of African slaves. And these African slaves came from mostly the western parts of Africa, what is today, let's say, Nigeria. So many black people in Cuba are of Congo origin, Yoruba origin, or mixed origin, and many, and even the white people and the mulattoes practice a religion that is called Santeria, which is the worship of the Orishas, the Yoruba spirits. And this is very real. I mean, these folks really do believe in these African spirits. And I will read a poem later on that connects with this. Now, going back to my hair, because it's so thick and curly, it's enormous, really, when I don't cut it. My mother got into her head that people would think we were of black descent. And if we were, I would be proud of it. But the thing is that we're not. And my mom was still obsessed with us. And it shows you how irrational people can be about race, about color, all these things. And, well, here it is, hair. Hair. Hair tells family secrets, like lips and skin. My chestnut curls and waves, that intractable thicket, 1 month's tropical growth, Mama called maleza de manigua, jungle scrub. What will the neighbors think? Locked in the bathroom, I brushed hard against the grain. Pig bristles, nylon quills, chrome needles, nothing tamed my guava bush. Not even the wire brush Papa used for mange of rust. I rubbed sores with Mama's alcohol and iodine, mixed in squirt bottles to disinfect the house of ghosts. Croon this wild boy, Mama told the barber as she pulled my hair, grimacing, red fingernails drawing blood. Cajoling the cranky pedal with grease, Luis, the barber, pumped up the chair he bought at a Hialeah junkyard, strop stained by rain. La Barberia squeezed between a butcher shop and cigar factory. America, love it or leave it, macrame nailed above hooks where old men hung canes, Panama hats. I slumped angrily, shoe kicking footrest, hands clenched under white shroud, plastic Virgin Mary scowling at me for hating Mama. Luis thinned the bush with toothed shears, straight razor hacked outer growth as Mama reminded him my grandfathers were Spaniards. Her Catalan father, his eyes between gray and blue, Roman nose, his brother's hair just like mine, curlier even. Tio Octavio looked Semitic, Mama said. You'd think he was Henry Kissinger. Fat and bald, back hairs brushed up like a cockatoo's crest. Luis shook his head, eyebrows raised, smiling like someone who's heard this before. Any hair is better than none, Senora, any hair. This next poem has to do with Miami. We moved to Miami in 1968, and we went from Lima to Miami in 1968, and we moved into a neighborhood that had only Americans, and we were the only Cubans there, and we weren't welcomed, and our neighbors made sure to show us that. And this poem is about what happened to us, and I'm not really changing the details all that much. I mean, I'm pretty much telling it straight. The poem has an attempt by a boy to use Spanish, which is incorrect. But the Spanish would mean kiss my ass. Miami, South Kendall, 1969. Papa was hosing down our new silver Grand Prix, I scrubbing muddy floor mats, when 7 boys rode up our driveway. Legs tummy gunned by mosquitoes, eyes gunpowder blue. They formed a line, passing around a furry Bowie knife. Go back to Cuba, the chorus taunted. We hate the Spanish. An indigo snake coiled about his wrist. Marcus hissed, snarled, telling my father to kiss his ass. Besamacula. A fellow 5th grader, it was a Marcus, who would pounce on me as I walked home from school, calling me a dumb spick for saying yellow like jello. Bony arms choking, my mouth scrubbed in dirt of dandelion and bitterweed. I cried alone in my room, ashamed for not hitting back, praying for Marcus's death, fists pummeling the pillow. Papa warned I'd grow up queer if I couldn't fistfight like my younger brother Carlos, little rooster. The boys began to hoot, make monkey faces. Marcus play-acted a lynching with a snake. Papa charged, spraying water, shouting, "I call the police, Foki son of a bitches!" Then all 7 mounted their bicycles, sprinting toward avocado groves. Some days later, we found death's heads carved on the garage door. Our cat, Tintin's head, floating in the pool. Papa sold the house at a loss, and we moved to a bungalow off 8th Street, Gayocho, our neighbors' newly arrived refugees. By 1971, freedom flights were bringing hundreds of Cubans each day, my grandmother Nena among them. The Everglades dredged for an expanding little Havana, politicos dreaming of a malecón on Biscayne Bay. Stars and stripes flying from car antennas, hate signs taped to windows, Anglos fled to rural Manatee and Osceola, some journeying as far north as Alachua, Apalachicola Bay, Blackwater River, and County Line Road, a strip of gravel and sticks, the new border dividing America from America. Maybe that's a story that resonates with many of you, I don't know. But it's certainly a story that defined my childhood, after the age of 10. I will be now reading poems from my book Fetish. Fetish is not about kinky boots or rubber toys or anything like that. It really it's amazing how many people think it is, and they end up buying books about S&M and all that, and I'm going, hey man, I'm way out of that. Fetish is the title fetish has to do with an actual fetish that I saw in this church in Cuba. A fetish is an idol, and in this case, it was specifically a Yoruba idol. Also, in broader terms, you also find this Orisha, this spirit in voodoo. His name is Elegua, and Elegua is the god, the Orisha, the spirit that is the way opener. He is the trickster god. He's the god that must be fed before all the other gods, or else you'll get into trouble with Elegua. So he's kind of a scary Orisha if you don't treat him right. And so I'll be reading this poem because I think it grounds the collection in that there is this fetish that I found. Yes, but in the book there are other poems which explore the broader idea of fetish, that which we find attractive, that which we find alluring, at the expense of everything else. And it's an irrational attraction, and I find that very interesting about people having certain relationships with cultures in which people do fetishize certain aspects of certain cultures. And I came to this poem as a Catholic, and as a Catholic, what do I do when I see, how do I understand, how do I come to terms with an idol right next to Our Lady of Regla, the Virgin Mary in that church? How do I make sense of that? And no one had removed it, no one had done anything to it. It was just there. So, fetish. Our Lady of Regla Church, Cuba. Beneath the sweet sop light of stained glass in El Agua, its head a smoked gourd carved with crosses that sprout capillary roots, inlays of cowrie shell for eyes, nose, and mouth, a long tail coiling into a rosary of tamarind seeds. Were guinea fowl sacrificed among sea grapes on the breakwater? Was goat's blood stirred with molasses and coconut crania? Who keeps vigil so the red votive light does not die, or ants plunder the thimble of sugar? Whoever laid you so near the altar did not fear destruction. Aren't priests supposed to crush you with hobnailed heels? Or the gentler sacristan sweep you out to sea with a Palm Sunday broom? Blessed squatter, gorgeous stowaway from the bite of Benin, I crave to take you home where snow and hail fall from brittle clouds that phosphoresce the night sky. Don't fear, snow is coconut flakes, hail rock candy. I will paint gauche jungles with aquatint vines, ochre cebas, orchids that grow in gessoed moonlight. Your lair of Spanish moss by a bay window, where you will eat red papaya, drink rum, sun like an iguana on a yagruma tree. This next poem is also set in Havana, and it was inspired by all the disrepair in Havana. If you were to go to Havana right now, you'd find pretty much a city in ruins. But not only that, people will use all sorts of things to survive, to make things work, to fix things. And so they jury rig everything. And I did find something very interesting that when I went to Cuba the first time in 1988, in the house of my wife's uncles, he had many books, paperbacks, classics, all of them. But they were printed so poorly that they were coming apart. And they were also being used for other purposes. So it's a society that's recycling everything because it has no choice but to recycle. So this poem is titled Libros, books. Hardbacks are the bricks that prop a sinking feather bed, while rag paper science fiction stows away in a Soviet fridge. shorted by blackouts. As novellas sprawl on a sailcloth love seat, hemp-bound histories spiral in corners spackled with lard and sawdust. Termites are mulchers of monographs. Molds colonize the sun-crackled tome. House mice nest in the scrunched tracts of Marx and Engels. During thunderstorms, gusts scatter pages beyond wood windows, beyond iron balconies. Flock of 1,000 that flaps over hills, glides past breakwaters, then falls, feathered, into pulping waters. This next poem that I will read is more personal. It has to do with my wife and I wanting to have a child and her being unable to many years back. She did eventually get pregnant, but before then we adopted another child from Panama. But this poem is set in western Cuba. It's the part of Cuba where tobacco is grown, and it's very it's got many karstic hills. It's very rocky, these strange hills that are like mounds made out of limestone. And there I had an encounter with the divine, and in asking Christ for a child, and so the poem is about that. And it's a very Catholic kind of poem. El Cristo de Piedra, Stone Christ, Valley of Viñales, Cuba, 2002. In this valley where limestone hills jut out like hairy moles over furrows of tobacco, a rock-faced Christ sprawls on a skew cross, as if a child had taken loose chert to etch his fanged mouth, stick legs, twigged fingers. I touch gouged eyes that weep candle wax, caress his ochre heart, pray to have a child. 5 years of dud pills, junk shots, toxic teas, a specialists who insist your wife's plumbing works. Her hours clocked to Clomid, Cetertide, HCG, fridge a mosaic of RXs, labs, metals, holy cards. I scratch the ground for a sign, a root gnarled like a crucifix, a seashell Mary, fig leaf scapular, but only dig up a few termites dried to husk. By year's end, we adopt a Panamanian girl, certain that Ibis would not conceive. Around March, she gets fits of heartburn, thinks it's acid reflux, then faints, vomits one morning. Doctor orders a blood test. Days later, Ibis calls me at work with the good news. I in a daze, her mother in Miami, sure that our long-distance novenas had worked, if late. God's miracle? Or was it vagrant chance that made the play? Either way, faith is deep water that wears away the rocks of reason, washes out silt of creed, unstable, profligate, resistant to doubt's gravity. I need to take a drink of water if you don't mind. How are we doing here with time? Okay. We got more time to rock and roll. Okay. This is also a very personal poem. It's about my adopted daughter who suffered from really severe attention hyperactivity deficit disorder, ADHD. I mean, really intense. And you know, so, I mean, some would say she was a difficult child and still is a very difficult person. But you know, it's brain chemistry. It's not working. And so we would go a lot to the grotto, Our Lady of Lourdes grotto at Notre Dame, where, you know, I would pray so that she would get better, and she would also attempt to pray. The grotto is a very important place for me as a Catholic. I don't know if you know what a grotto is. It's kind of like a makeshift cave where there's an image of Our Lady, the Virgin Mary. In this case, it's Our Lady of Lourdes because the grotto is a reproduction of the actual grotto in Lourdes, France. So it's a place of really intense devotion, and people leave notes and so on. I mean, it is that place. I will be using some Catholic terms, you know, for instruments, you know, like a pyx. A pyx is where the consecrated wafer is kept for the Mass. So the poem is entitled Pyx, and it's a sonnet. Pyx, Grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes, Notre Dame, Indiana. Wrought cross, wounds of rust, ice welted saints, a rosary that thaws in a bronze bowl, pyx of pleas. Valerie, giggling, snags it, a new necklace. Crows caw, flap low, silty clouds, specks of rain. She runs into the grotto, afraid of loud birds, thunder too, but will do handstands, cartwheels in a snowstorm. Beware to forget her pill. She'll eat pencils, cut clothes, glue lips, kneel in spring, she'll eat pencils, cut clothes, glue lips, staple ears at school. We feed the money box, light candles, kneel in spring air. Mother God, help me not break things, be good, not litter, she prays, her crossing astray. I correct cold hands, but she twists in my arms, darts toward the lakeside park. Afraid she'll get hit by a car, I chase, skies now dark, and scold. She cries, kicks, but piggyback can console. She plucks her beads. I drop a rung plea in the bowl. I think I'm going to end with another sonnet about doing carpentry work with my father. He was actually trained as an upholsterer, and he had a cabinet shop in Miami, and he wasn't very good at it. But he did teach me the value of work, even if he wasn't that good at it. And I was even worse at it, so you know, we weren't doing that well. But again, it's the value of work that I learned from him, and that the importance of crafting, and I think that has carried over into my poetry, certainly. Okay, so the poem's title is Ars Poetica, and it's, again, a sonnet. Ars Poetica. After an oiled stone wet the chinked blade, Papa planed leftover lumber, groomed the grain with emery rags, nipped shards, buffed to suede every nick and scratch that smeared an oily stain. Armoire, cupboard, credenza, or stool, each made to outlast mold's caprice, rot's relentless reign. A cement shed, pawn shop tools, Baba got paid with cardboard IOUs but didn't complain. Dallied bills, snubbed calls, worried about dirt, spoiling beeswax, a runny varnish, the hair that strayed into seamless shellac. While I gave succor to fractures, restored scraps, healed the wart on a lacquered pine leg, vigilant in my care of salvaged wood as it bucked the austere lathe. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Orlando, for that wonderful reading.
Oh, thank
still, my head is still kind of chasing after your words.
Thanks, Israel.
Michal Guvrin has published 10 books of poetry and fiction. In 2010, she was selected by the Salon du Livre of Paris as one of the most influential writers of the past 30 years. Among her novels, The Name, originally Hashem, with a 1995, from 1995, and a new edition with a postface by Yehuda Liebes from 2013, received the Kugel Literary Prize in Israel and was nominated for the Koret Jewish Book Award in its English translation, published by Riverhead Books, 1988 and 1999. Snapshots, originally Hafzikim from 2002, was awarded the 2003 Akum Prize for the Best Literary Achievement of the Year and was published in English translation by Riverhead Books in 2007 and in French translation by Sur le Vif 2008. Another collection, Hold On to the Sun, True Stories and Tales, was published by Feminist Press in 2010. Michal has also authored a meditation about prayer titled Body of Prayer, together with Jacques Derrida. She teaches at Tel Aviv University and directs a research group on transmitted memory and fiction at the Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem. Among the pioneers of Jewish experimental theater, Michal Guvrin has also directed award-winning performances in all the major theaters in Israel.
I'm very moved to be here. Thank you, Orlando, for the wonderful reading.
Well, thank you so much.
Coming here is very loaded for me, as I had the great honor and chance to have met and started a friendship with Shandy Rudolph at the very beginning of this program. I was inspired by her intelligence, brilliance, and warm heart that all were, I would say, embodied literature in the highest mode possible. And I'm very honored in that sense always to be here. I came to the classes, I think to the very first class of the program. I met here someone who was here at that class, so it's wonderful to see how the program is flourishing and opening and always even more complex and more rich than ever. So congratulations for that and thank you for inviting me over. Looking at the title of the conference and knowing that many people in the program come from different places and have experienced, as we've just heard from Orlando Menes, the experience of displacements in their own biography, and that literature in a way contains the move. I thought to myself that as a real Sabra, someone who was really was born in Israel, I might open the term of displacements in a slightly different way for you, and suggest that Israel is a container of displacements. It's a vessel that opens, and that is a vessel that everyone in the street that you will stop, either him or her, his or her parents or grandparents were displaced persons. And they brought with them both the stories of elsewhere, both the pain of being uprooted, and both this energy of starting again. This place has been founded also on the tragedy of another nation that has been displaced and carries as an identity these displacements as its main identity and pain. So we are somehow again in an epicenter, as very many times Jewish history brought us to be in the epicenter of a drama, and I think that somehow we can look at it as a drama of displacements. My last novel, which now is in translation into English, but and has appeared already, was published actually in Hebrew and in French at the same time the last summer, Love on the Shore, tells the story of a little town on the shore, Ashkelon, and how in the early 60s, and the stories of all those people coming from all over the world, and suddenly a love story connects them, and the border is so near, and you can see Gaza from the beach and from the bar or the discotheque where they meet. So this complexity of displacement and starting again in the biographies of people. But also I would start by reading 2 poems about Jerusalem, and I would suggest that Jerusalem is the place in a certain way, and contains in the heart of it the vision of so many desires that have been exploding it from the inside as a place of yet unmatched desires that want to be singular, each one of them, and that's why Jerusalem in moments is a wonderful place of multiplicity and of going from one neighborhood to the other as echoes of all many places, and when tension explodes, it's like an exploded body of displacing the place. So with that kind of a theme, I'll start with a poem and then I'll go to some fiction, if you allow me, and I'll try to do that in the time that I have. I think that I'll start with a poem about Jerusalem that might be strange for those who are not Israelis and might be too familiar for the Israelis. And it's about the tension Israelis might have against Jerusalem as a place that is a place of a threat for identity, maybe because of being too loved, too desired, and too complex. This is a poem I wrote on the beach of Tel Aviv in the middle of the Second Intifada in 2003. There is the name of Hillel here. Hillel was a sage of the Mishnah, but at the same time it's a name of a brand of coffee houses in Israel. And there was a notorious explosion in Cafe Hillel in Jerusalem. So I play with these two connotations. Who is afraid of Jerusalem? Who is afraid of Jerusalem? Who loathes and despises her? Who execrates her heart and tongue? Who says, what am I doing in this city of black hats and maniacs? This city of blood and enmity, where Hillel, the elder, pursues peace amid the broken cups and carnage. Who hates Jerusalem for the love wherewith he loved her once in secret? Courtyard shadows of the vine, twilight, jasmine blue. How cruel is the hatred of Jerusalem, a very flame. Many waters cannot quench it. And the translation is by Betsy Rosenberg. And the second poem, written also in 2003, and the poet near his house, the poem is written, is Yehuda Amichai. And it's an homage to Yehuda Amichai, who maybe knew the best he is the David of the Psalms, the new David of the Psalms of contemporary Jerusalem. So it's an homage to him. Near the poet's house. Near the poet's house, a boy is crying at the juncture. His mother darts out into the traffic to retrieve the ball that rolled away. This ball is the best. He hugs it close, still sniffling. If the poet were alive, he'd have something wise to say about loss, about solace, and the stones of Jerusalem and her inhabitants. But on the path that winds uphill, the mourner's stones and the radiance of winter are all that is left to reflect his image along the lanes, stone rough, word gentle, in a game of hide and seek between the living and the dead of the eternal city. For how shall we not hear winter, winter, when all is radiant again? How will the days go by in her eternity? How will our flesh be buried alive on the slopes of Jerusalem? And yet it is the stories on our lips, the songs of ascent we sing that raise her towers, the human monuments we fashion with a mouthful of air to fecundate the field of blood and consolation. Today, the veil of Hinnom holds the radiant morn of Edom, like the ball that rolled away, like the sudden burgeoning of hope, winter, winter, a crocus frilled in crimson, sprouting up with all its gentle might, no stem or foliage, right from the ground. Actually, I live near the Valley of the Cross in Jerusalem, and my morning strolls, like the one that I did this morning, and I met with Daniel, and I had already echoes of yesterday's day of the conference, is where I live, and every autumn I really wait for the crocuses to come. And 1 year, and I always wait for the first one, and there are special Jerusalem crocuses, which are very long and beautiful pink leaves. They were defined as Jerusalem crocuses. And I found the first, and there is a little habit, I don't know, maybe the scouts started it, that people would put around the crocus a round of little stones, that people won't walk on that. So I found this very first crocus, and I built my little circle around it and was very proud. And the next day I came to visit it. And sure enough, I see a group of people standing on my crocus, and I said, "Oi, they are really crushing it." I ran to salvage my crocus, and I saw, on the contrary, they were hearing an explanation about the crocus by a botanist, a group of people. So I stood behind, I didn't divulge that it is my crocus, and just listened to the explanation and learned why is that crocus coming straight from the earth, which was for years a secret for me. And I learned that first of all there are male and female flower fecundating their stems, the same flower, because they are so rare, and otherwise they would extinguish. And that the bulb is like 40 centimeters below ground, and the stem starts all the way from down there until the flower comes up. And it became for me such an image for the archaeology of what identity is and what this place is. So with that image of the crocus, I'll read you 2 sections from The Name, which is a novel written in the form of a prayer addressed to the name, Hashem, which is the name of God in Hebrew. So it's a night confession by a young woman, a penitent, Chozeret B'Tshuva, during this period, during the 49 days of the counting of the Omer, and with this time, with this ritual time, like the crescendo of attention, such the book goes, and she starts she starts writing in the nights, like Tikkun Chatzot, taking this Lurianic image of breaking of the vessels, the starting of the world, and doing her tikkun at night. And she starts with such a breakdown state that she addresses herself of last year with the second person and herself in her childhood in the third person. And only towards the end of the novel, the pronouns merge again and she gains her identity and accepting the brokenness and, if you want, the displacement as part of what she is. So that's the first part, is from the beginning of the book. The first time, at any rate, the first time I remember that she touched her, the little girl was 4 years old. Her outburst at the dull sequence of long mute months of a faded everyday was so violent that it scorched through them like a searchlight. How to go back there now, even for the confession I have to make to you? Please, God, receive my words with mercy. I'm trying to find the light without the shade. The parents weren't home, and the little girl stayed alone with Aunt Henya, who came down from Haifa. The week before had been her birthday, and on the afternoon she went with father, who was going to buy her a present. First they passed the store to see if mother was managing all right by herself. As usual, the store was full of women fighting over a box of potatoes, grabbing the few pieces of merchandise away from each other, raising their voices, their faces flushed. Mother stood behind the counter, her hair stuck under a kerchief, scared and not saying a word. The little girl waited next to the rotten-smelling boxes of onions until father lined the women up and put the potatoes on the pan of the scales. Then he took her hand and they walked on the big, crooked sidewalk. She thought father would be silent, as always, only every now and then shaking himself and saying something to her, and then the darkness of his face closing him up again. But today he held her hand in his big, smooth hand, with fingernails whose fingernails were clipped straight, bent over and said slowly that he and mother had decided to buy her a birthday present, a xylophone. She didn't yet know what the word meant or what the gift meant. He repeated very deliberately and asked her to repeat after him, xylophone. And by then she wished they wouldn't buy her a present, that father would just leave her alone. So what if she couldn't say it right, klisophone? But father held her hand tight and repeated it over and over until tears came into her eyes, and she didn't know why, because after all they were going to buy her a present, a klisophone. At home, father placed the small instrument on the table in the dining room, which was always dim with drawn curtains. He put down the leather-shaped instrument, its colored wooden plates growing smaller, down to the final yellow plate, held at the ends by 2 nails, and next to it the 2 small mallets with the blue knobs. That day father didn't go back to the store, and she didn't go out to play in the yard, but stayed there on the upholstered chair, her fists closed in father's hands, a mallet in each of them. Yes, now play, child, play. She looked, uncomprehending, first at father and then at the colorful instrument that had cost her tears even before she knew its shapes. Yes, play, with both hands. Play, Malinka, like this. He bent over and pushed her hands to make the mallets touch the plates, and his jacket twisted next to her. Yes, like this, harder. He pushed her hands and banged hard. She would certainly have burst out crying from the pain, or else, as usual, she would have held her breath with all her might to keep it in if the instrument hadn't suddenly produced a high, resounding yellow ring full of light, and then another one, a green one, and then a blue one. And she burst out laughing, and Father was smiling at her and stroked her head. More, Malinka, he whispered. And now she was absorbed in the joy of the bell-like sounds. She raised and lowered the little mallets, and her fists ran over the keyboard, pulling after them a trail of echoes and echoes of bell-like echoes, purple and pink and blue. But when she lifted her laughing face to see Father whirling with her in the cascades of tones, the mallets froze in her hands. His face was contorted, and he was looking at her with loathing like a stranger. You play ugly. Ugly, Amalia, he wailed, turning his back to her, his face covered with an awful black shadow, and going out of the room, leaving her alone on the chair with a prickly upholstery, and in her eyes the colors were all mixed up, floating in a turgid pond of sharp stains, blues, oranges, purples, yellows, and Father's stormy steps pounded from the other room as he paced back and forth for a long time. When Mother came home from the store that night, they didn't talk about the instrument. It stood on the cabinet next to the big box of the radio, a colorful outcast, captured in the rasping tones of the radio and its flickering light bulbs. Only the next afternoon, when Father went to the store and she was alone and her knees were dirty from the sand in the yard, did she carefully take the colorful instrument and the mallets from their place next to the radio. But when she heard the murmured, polished conversation of Father and Mother through the window, she cut off the cascade of colors and put the instrument back. Cunningly, she even remembered to lean the mallets a bit sideways, just as Father had cast them aside. For a few days she did this carefully, always managing to put everything back where it had been before Father and Mother came in. But on the day Aunt Henya came to them from Haifa, and everything in the house was mixed up because Aunt Henya was always opening and closing the windows, she didn't notice that Father and Mother were coming in and went on banging even when the door opened and they entered. Father burst into the dining room and yelled at her to stop, that she was only banging and pounding and didn't know how to play, that she should stop. His face was covered by the black shadow and his hands were shaking. Mother ran into the room after him and called out, "What do you want from the child, Stashek? What do you want from the child? She never played. You want her to play well at once? 1, 2, 3? She dragged him out of the room with her frail body. Mother and Father went back to the store, walking silently beside each other, keeping a forced pace as if they would lose each other if they didn't stick together, while Aunt Henya stayed with the little girl. The instrument and its mallets were cast aside on the floor. "Ah, Amalia, you really don't know anything?" chirped my Aunt Henya with a cloying smell of lipstick that always clung to the little girl's cheeks like a scar of family love. "You really don't know anything?" The little girl smiled politely at the aunt who came to take care of her and gazed vacantly at the floor tiles. "They didn't ever tell you about the little girl Father loved?" Aunt Henya smacked her lips as if she were telling a fairy tale. "There was once a little girl who played the piano so very gloriously, like an angel. She lived in the house next door to us. She could play Chopin's funeral march after she heard them playing it when a funeral passed by the street. A musical genius, that girl, a real genius, Malika." The little girl smiled at her aunt because she thought Aunt Henia was calling her by her nickname, Malinka, and she was still gazing at the mica spots on the floor tiles and didn't hear the clumsy prattle, but there was something unfamiliar in Aunt Henia's voice, and she straightened up there on the cool floor. Her aunt wasn't looking at her at all. She went on in her rising chirp, nodding her powdered face. Your father played the violin from the time he was a little boy. He'd go to Mala's house every afternoon to play music with her. I remember. Even then, he said they'd always be together, bride and groom. The aunt laughed to herself. They were together all the time, even when Malinka became a great pianist and Stashek wasn't playing music with her anymore. She played in the Stary Theater and in the opera. Everybody went to hear her. And when we went into the ghetto, the SS allowed her to go on to play her music. She was our angel, Mala. The little girl couldn't take her eyes off the white powdered face jumping in and out of the light and shadow, which for some reason pushed a twinge in her stomach and throat. They never parted, never. Stashek's great love. Even in the camp, when nobody had any strength left, she and your father made a plan to escape together. When he was working in the quarry. Yes, well, you can't imagine how fantastic she was. What heroism. Even when they wanted to finish her off. All of us women standing there, they made us come out of their huts for the appel, standing and looking at her. Like a queen she was there, like on stage when she played. So proud. She looks at us, in the middle of the Appelplatz and finishes herself off with a razor blade she was hiding in her hair. So free. Mala. The little girl didn't understand what Henia was talking about, or why she said that father worked in a quarry and not in the fruit and vegetable store. And anyway, what was a quarry and why she was talking about a razor blade after mother yelled at her never to dare play with that? And why cut your hair? And her heart pounded wildly, apapats, apapats. And her throat was choked with twinges, apapats. At night, another little girl wearing a black dress with the white collar came into her room, opened the drawers, and rummaged around in her things. But she didn't yell, because she was afraid the other little girl would get mad and father would punish her. She just moved to the corner and made room in her bed for the other little girl next to the dolls, so she wouldn't get mad. For a few nights, the other little girl slept with her in bed, touching her with her smooth dress. Once she tried to finish off the strange little girl, but couldn't because she didn't exactly know how, and she only called her Malinka and shoved her under the pillow in the apapats and covered everything up and smacked the pillow with all her might. But suddenly her heart started yelling and she picked up the pillow in a terrible panic before the little girl in the black dress died and father yelled, and she lay on her side with her heart throbbing and didn't budge because now she was sure the other girl would kill her for what she had done. And in the meantime she silently planned how she would undress her and put her naked on a pole she'd stick in her pee-pee on a cart like the Purim carnival, so everyone in the street would see how she was naked and would laugh at her, and so would the kids next door. And that was nice to think about, even if she was scared. But then Aunt Henia left, and the second Malinka didn't come at night anymore, and she played clanging notes on the xylophone, and nobody mentioned it. But for a long time she went on hiding the apapats under her pillow. And a few lines from the end. She ends the writing at the eve of Shavuot, Pentecost, which that year falls on Saturday night, so in a way the holiday starts the day before on a Friday. So instead of going into the 50th day, which was the culmination of her mystical ascent, she has to stop at at Shabbat's Eve. And the whole book shifts from trying to run away, to be displaced, to run away from what you were born to the story inherited, to run away to New York, to extreme experiences as a photographer, then to a journey to Poland and to Germany, and then running away to a penitent seminar of Chozrot B'Tshuva in Jerusalem. All that running away at the end somehow stops into what I would call the containing space, the feminine space, which are those parts of Judaism which are the Shabbat, Sabbath, or the Sukkah, or the seventh year of the sabbatical year. These are moments of release, of holding and containing everything in another space, a transformation from running away into containing, becoming a vessel to the brokenness, to the life, to hope, accepting the state of things in the world. And that is after a great fight with her true lover in the novel, which is God. And after somehow breaking away from God in order to find him in another way. So a few sentences for the end. The candles are extinguished in the holders. Can't get up and recite the blessing. The light is coming to an end and my hand is still reaching to write. And the storm has not yet vanished. As if something is still revealed, clarified for the first time. As if a barrier was removed from my eyes. The distraction exposed on the slopes, caustic, uncovered, as if this is the covenant and also the consolation. For there is no repair for the break, and there is no instant repentance, only acceptance. What will be and what is and what was. Death here is consolation. The break hidden between us, King who causes death and restores life. As if everything that was only to reveal to me on the verge of the end of the counting, the great tenderness hidden here between us in the destruction. It's almost the Sabbath and I'm still bent over here at the open window, savoring the new taste of calm. The time has come just to go on turning now with no expectations anymore for an answer. Just to go on turning to what is gaping there in the calm, everything I shall give you, everything. Enter, O bride. Just to go on turning, that's the prayer. Just to go on turning in the expanding space. And the voice speaking between us is enough. Enough the words of the prayer muttered from my lips. For that the blessing, my Lord, open my lips. For that. Just open more. You'll just go on mattering the voice from my throat, my tongue, my lips, without an expectation anymore that you will accept, that you will hear. And maybe that is the answer. Finally, that is the answer. A calm, suspended meanwhile in the realm that is opening with the exhalation of the breath in the turning. And past and present and future are mixed up without giving, without taking, for all is one. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Sabbath.
Thank you, Michal. I think we've had a real treat this evening. I'm still buzzing from everything that we've heard, and I'm sure people have questions. So we've got some time now.
This question is actually to both of you in different ways about translation.
Michal, you were reading work that's yours, but it's
Been translated.
Yes, and I didn't mention the name of the wonderful translator of the name, which is Barbara Harshav.
and
Orlando, you translate, so you take other people's work into a different language. How do you both feel about the new work? Is it yours? Is it shared with somebody else?
Well, I spent many years translating the poetry of Alfonsina Storni, and it really would be presumptuous of me to say these translations are mine. Yes, they are. I mean, the translations are mine, but the poems aren't mine. They don't belong to me. I was not the receiver of inspiration for them. I did not struggle for them. I did not gestate them. I didn't do anything with them. I just transported them from one language to another. Now, in the process of transporting that text in Spanish to English, I did shape it in my own way. Yes, I was, it's not selfless. It is not a selfless act. That would be a machine. And that is important to know, that because it is more of a selfless act, it's more of an homage to that writer, an homage to the poem that you're translating. It is service more than anything else. I see it as service. That's really how I see it.
I'm always extremely grateful to my translators in languages that I have. I work closely with the translators, and it's a discovery of the work in another stage, in another with another echo. Actually, I think that I'm excited by the idea of translation, both because of my training as a theater director, and I know how every directing is another performance, and it's fascinating to see how the same words resonate through other actors, and so many other connotations and subtexts are revealed before your eyes. And even beyond that, I mean, quoting Walter Benjamin and about the real oeuvre being discovered beyond its language, I think it touches something very, very, especially for a novel, but for any language, for any literary language, about the performative dimension of reading. I think that actually every reader, while reading, is a translator. Because the reader, in a way, executes the music and puts in the whole, this extraordinary mental work that we unconsciously do when words turn into smells, sights, sounds. What an extraordinary neurological work we do in order to embody them, and everyone brings his or her own connotations and visions into it. So translation touches into something which is in the core of reading, and I would say that it is a species, endangered species today in the world where reading is so endangered, and this is an extraordinary mental work of embodying language slowly into words, which in a way builds the performer, the reader, as much as the text. And I see for that my translators and my readers as the closest collaborators of the actual act of writing.
I just want to add this quickly. On the printed page, you don't have any italics or any boldface, but when I heard you, you had all of them in the right place, and it was such a flow. It's really, really appreciated with this experience.
I know that some things are lost in translation. Like Michal Gogril, when I read, I don't read Hebrew, I'm no Hebrew scholar, but I know enough of the Bible and the Siddur So when I make these connections, the meaning becomes so much deeper in Hebrew than it is in English. Do you find the same thing with Catholicism when you use the Latin words and when you use the litany and the church prayers in your work? When,
Let me see, did I
let's
use
make
Latin?
it deeper.
Oh, did I use Latin?
No, I said, do you think it would
Oh.
make it more immediate to a Catholic reader?
Oh, wow. Well, okay. Take a word like novena, right? In English, it's novena, but I didn't hear novena. I heard novena. Yeah. So I'm translating a word that I heard as novena into novena for you guys. But to me, novena has no connection emotionally at all. It's novena. That's the word I heard, from my mother and the other women, in my family, in my community, Hey, you really want something, you gotta go for the novena, the 9-day home run. So, yeah, I'm translating my childhood into English for my readers, but the childhood exists in Spanish purely. It does
That's
not
what I
exist in
meant.
English. No.
Can I just follow up to that? So why don't you write in the language that's the most meaningful to you, and then put a note at the end of the poem, the back of
Right.
the book, saying this? Wouldn't that enrich?
Because I lost it. I lost part of it. In the process of becoming an American, that created a distance between my maternal language and English. I became another person. And so my command of Spanish is that of a child. If I write in Spanish, I don't sound like an adult. I just
I
don't.
don't mean writing in Spanish, I mean that taking the word
Oh,
and writing
novena?
the word that's most meaningful to you, okay?
Right.
And using that word in the poem rather than the translated English.
But it's the same word.
With that.
It's spelled the same way. Novena, still spelled the same way. I just say novena in public. But I think novena.
I'll add to Orlando in that sense that this word that the little girl invents, Apapatz, which is her distortion of the German word Appelplatz, that sounded so threatening in the Hals, becomes kind of a primitive prayer to her, an invocation, because the word is not understood, because something is foreign entering. So sometimes the transmission of language that you don't speak stands there like syllabus, like a conjuring power, and tears apart the continuous tissue of textile of text of language.
If I can follow up to that, it seems interesting because I'm listening to you and thinking back on things that you said earlier, Orlando, and about the relevance of this to a program like this where so many of us are working in between languages somehow. Even people who are not, we do have a translation track within the department now, but many of us in the department, among the literature faculty, even among the linguistics faculty, are people who somehow live between languages. And I could really relate to a lot of what you said because my mother tongue is Hebrew, and I just adopted English at some point. And I have that same sense of there's something, because you said earlier in the first panel that when you think or free write, you have to do it it can't be in English because you need to go
Right.
back to something.
To access childhood memories.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to ask you, Michal, is one of my experiences as being an Israeli among English speakers writing about, in many cases, life here, is that it's very hard for me to hear Israeliness translated. I mean, I will translate it back in my head. I always feel like even though most of I'm an English literature scholar, that's what I do, but I always feel that as an Israeli, there are certain things you will always feel the loss in the translation. I mean, you've talked about the gains, and I kind of wonder whether there's still places where it just sounds, there's something there that you can never quite capture because you're doing it for somebody else. So is that an enriching experience? Is there ever a sense of loss?
As a child growing up in Tel Aviv, I always looked at the sea and wanted to sail far away and discover other places. I think Tel Aviv is a place of refugees. You always somehow, you feel like a little Europa or something like that. And as a child from literature was something that comes from there into and any kind of all the translation into Hebrew. So the sense of place is always in language, and also the language of the Bible. Do we have the reality of the Bible? Yet there is that physicality of the place, the light, which can we transmit it or cannot we transmit it? What do we create with that? For Jerusalem, it's easy because everyone carries a certain Jerusalem in the head. And you evoke it. People come with a Jerusalem before they see the place. So it's a phenomenon that Israeliness, in a certain way, I think that I rebel against that turn. I think that my writing, as you could see, is not very characteristic to my generation or to the generation before me of Oz and Yoshua and Grossman, where they are really trying to define an Israeliness. And I constantly say that I'm the crocus. There is so much, the bulb is below the earth. It's not just these little things. So I'm always stubbornly going into the archaeological side, bringing in all those echoes that were shaped here and open here, and civilizations that were here. So in a way, the Israeliness is just one layer on top of everything, and which is interesting, but you cannot stay there. And somehow you have to push the dust and go inside, and then somehow when it goes into other languages, I mean, people who read this novel were sure that it's a Catholic woman, because there is something very much about Jerusalem syndrome before it was even diagnosed. Because you touch somehow the underground deep waters when you translate. And Bobby Harshav used King James. So sections of prayer sound like Faulkner for me. So suddenly I'm in the south, and I'm daydreaming about all these people singing hymns. So somehow language in a way bridges, I think, experiences. Yes, there are many things that are lost and others are gained. It's always like that in every relationship, I think.
Can I add another thing? May I add another thing?
Sure.
Okay, first of all, what you said about the sea is my life. I grew up in Naples, which is somehow like Tel Aviv, and always looked at the sea and saw, without ever having been there, I saw Tel Aviv being there. I've also been a sailor. And then now in Tel Aviv, I see Naples there in the back of my mind. But when it comes to working with languages, which is really the more important thing, I decided at one point, the only way I'm going to ever learn Hebrew, with all the mistakes I've made, and some of them are so classic, as no point, was to write in Hebrew, write all my poems in Hebrew, and that's what I've been doing like for the next 20 years. But for other things like prose, I write contemporarily in Italian, French, English, and Hebrew. And I just juggle between versions until I finally get one version, which is in meta language, which from where I get the final words when I write the same thing in French, that influences what I will rewrite in Italian, on the Italian version.
Every language is a world.
I just wanted to make a very quick comment and say that I appreciate so much the candor and the openness and the sharing that both of you have done, well, all three of you have done, as writers, the backstory of your pieces, what you bring to it, what your thinking was. And it's very inspiring and it's very connecting, I think, to all the people sitting here. And it's I felt like it was a love offering. So I just wanted to thank you both, all for
Thank you, that's a
sharing that.
wonderful
It's
thing
really
to say.
special.
Now, I wanted to make another sort of observation-y kind of question here, and I'm really struck with both, speaking of your backstories, I'm really struck with the way bit to get into the story, you told that beautiful analogy of the crocus. And you gave us a lot of back history with Cuba and slavery and Yoruba and Santeria and all of that. And so I'm really struck, a lot of times, I think when everybody writes, you're writing, what was it, it takes, how many feet of shit does it take to make a flower in American literature? Who said that, Emerson? Like, you have to take, it takes a lot of years to make a literature, right? And he used that term of manure as a metaphor for the years that a country has to exist, or a literature has to exist for you to make your little crocus flower in a book. And what I noticed with both of you, because you're writing about childhood, both writing about childhood in various languages and in various places, and you can really see the layers here through the metaphor of the child, of all the different generations that came before, and all of the different cultural forces. It's almost like looking at strata of a rock, to hear you two read and to see you two in action, and it's really powerful when you have that visual there, so thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. Yeah, it's you know, when the word exotic has been used for my writing quite a bit, which is, it's kind of. I mean, I'm of two minds about it. It's a way of marginalizing the literature, of course. I mean, that's certainly one way. But there's also an element of attraction that keeps the reader interested, a fetish of sorts. Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is. And so when that label is used, how do I live with that? What do I do with it? I mean, I'm never ever going to sound like someone from Arkansas. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And when I was a kid, I wish I had been from Arkansas. My God, that would have made me so happy. The kids wouldn't have beat me up. And
Oh, they would have, yeah.
How in Arkansas?
Maybe Ocala, I don't know. Some place like that in central Florida. I don't know. It's just when you're different. When you are that other. Well, you have to live with it. I mean, you have to embrace it in your own way. You have to be true to it in your own way. And I when I was a kid growing up in Miami, I rejected my Cubanness. I mean, I didn't like other Cubans. I wanted to stay away from them. And because, I didn't like myself. And then when I came to terms with myself and I accepted myself, later when I was an adult, I was able to write. I was able to be true to myself. I was able to relax, and just enjoy the act of writing and not be so preoccupied with pleasing, Because, a writer needs to reach a reader, no doubt about it. I mean, you cannot write for yourself. That's a given. But I'm not like, other writers who are really into pleasing, because if I write a certain kind of poem, then such and such an editor will notice me. And, it's true. I mean, it often happens that way. But then, you end up being someone else's poet, I mean, I don't know, it's, yeah, so I've come to terms with, just like being who I am, and that's it. You take me or you leave me. So that's it.
I'll tell the opposite story. Growing up in Tel Aviv, as if everything was just on the surface and totally normal. And yet, I really wanted to be a writer since I was a child, because there was some mystery that I knew was there, but I couldn't name it. And I say to myself, how can I ever be a writer in this boring apartment on the third floor of this house with these two elderly parents, nothing happens here. I will never have a childhood to talk about, as all those writers that always draw from their childhood and being different. I'm so much the same, and especially, I mean, with my looks. I mean, how? I mean, and then I understood that with my two parents at home, I have almost the whole history of the Jewish nation in the 20th century. My father arriving as a first pioneer and my mother surviving the Holocaust. And I just couldn't see that as a child. So the action was the opposite, from being very much absorbed in the society and being the leader and beating all the bully boys of the environment and being the football head of the team of the neighborhood and being this bellboy, how do you say that in English? A girl who wants to be a boy. Tomboy. The tomboy. Suddenly I had, and that was a veneer that the society somehow put on us. It was a whole work of taking off the Israeliness and excavating the brokenness which was behind it and accepting it. So it's the same in the opposite, same story in the opposite direction. And discovering now in something that I'm writing that there was a Tel Aviv and there was the hidden city, which was under the pavement of Tel Aviv. And people spoke other languages there. And they suddenly emerged from elsewhere and came back into their places.
Okay, thank you both so much. This was a wonderful.
Michal Goldman has her books with her. If you want to buy them, they're right here, and she'll sign them for you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
Nadia asked me to schlep them, so I schlepped them.
Can you sign them?
Sure.